Thanks for joining us. This is The Week Ahead. We are broadcasting live from our homes straight to yours. My name is Ibrahim Sani and I am joined by my colleague Hafiz Marzukhi.
Yes, Ibrahim, as usual, as we head into the third week of June, among the items that will dominate this coming week would definitely be, as always, we've been talking about this week in, week out, the vaccine rollout. And of course, something new would probably be talks about Parliament reopening as well as the state assemblies. And of course, we're heading into the third round of Euro 2020.
Yes, and I know we sound like a broken record. We keep on talking about vaccines and vaccines and vaccines because, as we all know, vaccines have always been the kind of exit strategy out of the MCO and the prolonged economic impact that we have on our country. I just finished, before starting this show, I just finished my interview with Professor Jeffrey Williams of the Malaysian University Science and Technology. It will air tomorrow on Notepad. It will talk about the need for us to decouple the economic policy with the healthcare management, i.e., the way we manage healthcare on COVID shouldn't be the same with the way we manage economy. It no longer works. That's his premise. Watch that show this time tomorrow. Okay, so now we start off with our program for tonight with some updates on the vaccination process. According to the minister coordinating the COVID-19 rollout, vaccines rollout, Khairi Jamaluddin, he says that large economies such as the US, the UK, Canada, and the likes have been hoarding vaccine supplies. But compared to other nations, according to him, Malaysia is still ahead when it comes to procuring vaccines. Here's a clip of him talking about such matters.
Apabila perbandingan dibuat terhadap negara jiran kita, Malaysia merupakan negara antara ke depan. Tetapi untuk menunjukkan perbandingan dengan negara-negara maju yang telah membolot vaksin, next slide. Inilah gambar vaksin inequity dunia. Di mana kita melihat negara Jepun, negara yang maju di Asia, namun demikian jauh ketinggalan berbanding dengan kesatuan Eropah, United States, United Kingdom dengan Canada. Kenapa? United Kingdom telah beli cukup vaksin untuk penduduk mereka 5 kali ganda. Canada telah beli cukup vaksin untuk 5 kali ganda penduduk mereka. Syarikat-syarikat pengeluar vaksin adalah syarikat-syarikat daripada United Kingdom dan juga daripada United States. Sekarang ini barulah negara-negara ini mula nak menawarkan bantuan melalui sumbangan vaksin. Jadi kita telah terima sumbangan kita akan terima sumbangan daripada negara United States, daripada Jepun, daripada negara China dan sebagainya.
So that's the thing, right? We want to know more about whether or not the procurement of the vaccines can be accelerated, but at the same time, a lot of countries, particularly Western countries, are hoarding these kind of vaccines. Very recently, in fact, just yesterday, I was having a show with the CEO of Afin Huang. He was talking about the notion that no one in this part of the world would claim that China is their friend. No one. No one country. But China has been giving vaccines in the millions to all these countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and so on. America, UK, and all this, however, tends to claim that we're their friends and they are our friends, none of which have given us their vaccines. So this dichotomy of do we really need a friend or do we really need vaccines come into the fore. And when it comes to the Western countries, particularly the G7 nations, it's a very problematic notion that because of them hoarding, they are reducing the availability of supplies for countries like us.
Yes, Ibrahim, of course. I mean, there's one thing about using vaccines as a currency for global diplomacy. But I think the issue here is not just about vaccine procurement, right? I mean, we are well aware of, how the vaccine supply is dominated by the bigger and wealthier countries. And of course, Malaysia has certainly procured more than 100%. In fact, I believe it was the number is about between 109 to 120%. Of vaccines procured. I think the challenge now is, of course, the delivery aspect. And when we encounter such problems, of course, nobody could have foreseen it 6 months or 9 months ago when the deal was actually struck. But I think the key here is knowing the problem, understanding that vaccines supply is limited, what is the way to actually counter that? Because at the end of the day, I mean, you can talk about COVID-19 being endemic, etc., etc. But I think the key thing here, and as very well underlined by His Majesty Yang di-Pertuan Agong, vaccine is currently the exit strategy out of the pandemic.
All right, it's not just that, right? Because we did talk about the two, I guess, household names now, Prof. Adiba of UM as well as YBKJ. Both of them very recently, a few days ago, talked about herd immunity no longer being the outlook that we need to have. So even if we have herd immunity, even if vaccine is out of this pandemic, we might not be able to reach that kind of notion of putting down the disease in our communities. Because if herd immunity no longer works, then what is? And that is the big problem that we need to think about. So in the week ahead, we are going to be hearing more about the vaccines, particularly in the vaccine rollout, vaccine procurement, and the number of vaccinations per day. Remember, we're targeting 300,000 daily vaccinated doses per day by the end of July. So we are keeping a close eye on that. But just as we have not dealt yet with the issues of COVID-19, we now have to continuously talk about the new variant Delta, first seen in India, but now we've seen it everywhere in the country. And according to a public healthcare specialist, Dr. Zainal Arifin Omar, he says that the Delta variant is a bigger issue that we all need to keep a closer eye and a closer attention on. Here he is speaking about the issue.
Majoriti varian Delta ni adalah telah melibatkan banyak negara di seluruh dunia. Pertama, dia agak serius kerana boleh menyebabkan jangkitan yang besar, dia katakan cepat merebak lah. Okay? Yang kedua, kemungkinan dia juga boleh menyebabkan simptom ataupun tanda-tanda yang lain daripada biasa lah. Jadi kadang-kadang itu yang menyebabkan mungkin keadaan itu akan menjadi lebih serius ataupun mungkin orang tak perasan bila jangkitan Delta ni berlaku lah. Varian Delta ni sebenarnya telah ada dalam negara ya. Kita kena faham bahawa sebenarnya kemungkinan dia sama ada dia datang daripada luar negara atau dia memang berasal daripada dalam negeri sendiri ya, kerana virus ni dia akan berubah dengan sendirinya di dalam lokasi ataupun dalam sebuah negara lah.
Yes, so as you can see, Ibrahim, I mean, this is indeed a very big issue and it's very problematic when you talk about variants. And this is where vaccination again comes into play because, you know, we're playing a race with the virus in terms of defeating it or outpacing it before it mutates and just gives a whole new set of problems for our population, Ibrahim. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that... you know, I don't think that vaccinations should be the only way forward. I now am beginning to think that we have to forge ahead and accept this as a new normal. You and me working from home, some of our colleagues making sure that this show is going to run properly at the office. This is the way forward. No longer are the days that we can walk around the malls, you know, take a long walk at the park with a lot of our friends and watch cinemas, you know, get inside the cinemas. I don't think that's going to be the normal anymore. As we speak, a colleague of ours at Astro AWANI is in intensive care, battling COVID. He's a young guy, he's in his young 30s. And this is what the new Delta variant is all about. It attacks the young, and of course, it mutates to a point where it shows symptoms that were not seen before in other COVID-19 variants, including that of coughing incessantly, coughing fits, they call it. And I urge for you to watch this right now, to continue to look out for the symptoms of COVID-19 Delta variant, to find out more about this particular new variant and try to understand the symptoms that may be suffering from it, because I think the quicker we stop and contain this particular variant from expanding even further, that's the only way forward moving on. Okay, we'll go for one short break. Well, when we come back, we'll talk about the Parliament.
Pertembungan 24 pasukan terbaik Eropah kini bermula. Setiap detik, setiap gol.
So, self-control, self-lockdown itu penting. Lebih kurang pergerakan, maka lebih sukar untuk COVID menjangkit kita.
Untuk tempoh 2 minggu ini, duduk di rumah. Kalau kita boleh laksanakan KKP Kendiri dan keluarga.
Saya kira insya-Allah kita boleh berjaya. Akhirnya kita menang.
Untuk memastikan Malaysia ada ke depan kita boleh maju. Induknya adalah Melayu.
Balik kepada Islam. Orang yang membuat polisi.
Kalau itu yang dikehendaki, fine. Mungkin kita berbeza pandangan.
Tapi kita mempunyai kuasa yang boleh menentukan budaya di masa hadapan.
Polisi yang mesra wanita sudah tentu dia akan datang daripada pemimpin wanita.
Perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.astroawani.com atau aplikasi Astro Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no
This is the week ahead. My name is Ibrahim Sani. My colleague Hafiz Marzukhi is joining us. We're doing this live for you. We are going to expect a lot more chatter and conversation next week pertaining to the Parliament reopening. Because while the COVID management is still ongoing, the talks of Parliament reopening as requested by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, the King, is also the talk of the town. The Prime Minister, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, says that to open the Parliament is not as easy as what people think. He says that a lot more consideration and a lot of deliberations are needed. And therefore, all these outstanding matters must be taken into account before the Parliament is being even considered to be reopened. Here he is talking about the matter.
Saya harap rakyat faham. Ini bukan soal nak menafikan hak ahli parlimen ataupun nak menyanggah kenyataan yang di-Pertuan Agong atau raja-raja. Saya faham tanggungjawab sebagai Perdana Menteri besar, tapi saya kena berlaku adil supaya jangan nanti timbul isu-isu dan masalah kemudian yang menyebabkan kerajaan tidak boleh nak menguruskan soal sebegitu. Jadi ini satu perkara yang harapnya rakyat akan faham dan menunggu. Bukan sengaja cari jalan nak delay, takut ada usul undi tak percaya. Saya tak pernah takut. Saya dah dekat 40 lebih tahun dalam parlimen. Itu semua Allah menentukan. Menang, kalah, jadi kerajaan, tak jadikan. Tapi yang penting kita nak tumpu sekarang ini soal nak menyelesaikan masalah yang kita hadapi sekarang ni.
So you can see clearly, Ibrahim, from the statement made by the Prime Minister. I think when we're discussing about the Parliament reopening, I think it's all about setting priorities, right? It's right now in his mind, in Tan Sri Muhyiddin's mind, priority should be on pandemic management. And I guess when he's discussing about pandemic management, or when he looks at pandemic management, his approach does not really consider Parliament as one of the key things in terms of handling the pandemic. And I think it's all about political will at this point, because if you talk about just reopening Parliament, you see other countries around the world who's also experiencing COVID also have their parliaments reopened, or actually, in fact, it's not even closed or prorogued. It's still ongoing as usual. I guess the key thing now is actually to find ways to do it hybrid, whether it's a mix of online and physical, or actually turn it into online. But I'm sure there's a few issues when it comes to our constitution, and there's some legal framework that needs to be fine-tuned before we can achieve that. But of course, what say you, Ibrahim, regarding this matter?
I just find it interesting that the Prime Minister thinks that the COVID-19 pandemic management does not include the oversight of the people's representatives in an open and transparent forum like the Parliament. I think that he has presented a case that it shouldn't be as such, and he is imploring on the people to see it his way. But I am one of the people, and I do not see it that way. But I am just one of the 33 million people. So I'm not too sure whether or not the rest of Malaysia will see it his way. But that is all moot, because if you think about it, what recourse do we have? Do we have the ability to ask for a greater power to intervene? We tried, and that has been given by the king, imploring, not just alone, not just an individual, but the Brethren of Rulers or the Council of Rulers did support this kind of statement. So I wouldn't call it an impasse. I would just call it the Prime Minister and therefore this administration are not wanting to move ahead on what the king has requested. So I don't know whether or not this is going to be resolved at the federal level. But while at the same time we have to remember what the king said in the statement that was released by the palace, that the state assemblies must also carry out their meetings, which brings about now the legality of the whole matter, which brings us to our next story, which talks about an analyst arguing that the emergency ordinance could be read differently from what people think it should be read as. So this analyst argues that the state legislative assemblies, or the DUNs, do not need to wait for the parliament to reopen. He says that the emergency ordinance should be scrutinized clearly to understand the issue better. In fact, to be clear, he says that Section 15 of the Emergency Ordinance of 2021 should not be read together with the Section 14 of the same law. He says it requires an agreement with the state rulers to make it work. And he explains it in this phone interview with Astro AWANI.
Jelas mengatakan kalau Dewan Undangan Negeri mahu bersidang, perlu ada persetujuan bersama antara Yang Tuan Agong dengan Yang di-Pertua Negeri, kalau Pulau Pinang, kalau negeri lain Sultan ataupun Raja lah. Jadi perlu ada persetujuan. Dinyatakan yang jelas persetujuan antara Yang Tuan Agong dan Sultan atau Raja atau Yang di-Pertua Negeri.
Okay, so here is another dynamic of it. We were talking about the parliament not moving ahead because the Prime Minister says that there are a lot of other factors that needs to be considered. But at the same time, here we have a law professor from my alma mater at UIA, or the International Islamic University, argues that if you read a law at a specific way, in a specific light, you can actually move ahead with the state assemblies convening. You just need the approval of the state rulers, i.e. in this case, the sultans and also the governors of the TYT, Tuan Yang Terutama. Now, while there is a legal outlet to this, I don't know whether the states would move ahead to open their state assemblies. I would assume 2 or 3 states that come to mind, maybe Selangor or Penang or Sarawak or Sabah might move ahead. But I don't know about the rest. So now we see a disjointed effort where some states open, some don't. Parliament may open, hybrid, not hybrid, that kind of mix and bobs and bibs of our 4th or 3rd legislative pillar are taking into effect. Now, something is better than nothing, but I don't know whether this is the optimal way moving forward.
It's interesting that you brought the legal aspect up, Ibrahim, because a few weeks back, actually, the Penang State Assembly actually wrote to the National Security Council or Majlis Keselamatan Negara. In fact, they actually wanted to reconvene their state assembly, but the answer given was not yet, or not at this moment. So, yeah, it's good to know that legally state assemblies could reconvene during this time, because when you talk about the state legislatives or even federal legislative, it is important to actually scrutinize the measures that are put in place, especially when it comes to pandemic management, not just at the federal level, but also at the state level. So, yeah, you're right. It's a very
my question now is on the recourse.
It's a disjointed effort.
Yeah, my question is on the recourse. So the Prime Minister is delaying the reopening of the Parliament. There is no recourse for that. The state assemblies want to open and is said or is told not to. But if they open, what is the repercussion? Will this be tested by the laws, i.e. will this go to court and test the second branch of the government? So I don't know whether this is the way forward, but I do believe that while we are busy battling the COVID, things like this, administrative items, shouldn't be at the forefront of the cerebral cortex of Malaysians. I think all of us need to rally behind the frontliners and make it work for them. I think that opening, reopening, calling up the lawyers, making sure that the lawyers are aware of which law or test the law, or I think that's just efforts that are counterproductive on battling the pandemic. And because of this, I'm very, very disheartened that this is the way forward. But at the same time, it is not really that surprising.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that, Ibrahim. And I guess this coming week we'll see a few more things in terms of which state actually announcing their intention to actually reconvene the state assemblies. In fact, I believe Perlis have already announced that they will reopen it in the final week of August. But of course, this is assuming that the current emergency proclamation does not get continued beyond the 1st of August, Ibrahim.
Okay, we'll go for one more break. When we come back, we'll talk about normalcy. And the normalcy will come in the way of football. We'll be right back after these messages.
Self-control, self-lockdown tu penting. Lebih kurang pergerakan, maka lebih sukar untuk COVID menjangkit kita.
Untuk tempoh 2 minggu ni, duduk di rumah. Kalau kita boleh laksanakan KKP, Kendiri dan keluarga,
saya kira insyaAllah kita boleh berjaya. Akhirnya kita menang.
Untuk memastikan Malaysia ada ke depan dan maju. Induknya adalah Melayu.
Balik kepada support system. Orang yang membuat polisi.
Kalau itu yang dia kehendaki, fine. Mungkin kita berbeza pandangan.
Tapi kita mempunyai kuasa yang boleh menentukan budaya di masa hadapan.
Polisi yang mesra wanita sudah tentu dia akan datang daripada pemimpin wanita.
Perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.astroawani.com atau aplikasi Astro Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone must follow all the steps to stop the spread of COVID-19. Social distancing, face mask, follow these steps, this SOP with the utmost discipline.
Welcome back. This is the week ahead. We're doing it live. Let's talk about football. Okay, so Hafiz, the frustrating thing about watching football in Europe is that people are in the stadiums, they're shouting, screaming. Probably most of them have been vaccinated. If you look at the daily cases of most of these countries, yes, of course, while there are still daily cases happening, if you split it down to cases per million and the amount of testing that is done by most of these countries, and when I say most, I'm talking about Hungary, Ukraine, Italy, those kind of countries, right? And it's frustrating to see how they have gone to well past the recovery phase and now moving back to normalcy phase. And yet we are still battling this and grappling this. And of course, what we do see from the TV is in Europe, but the same can be said about the US. New York is getting back to normalcy. Stephen Colbert, for instance, is now back in the studios at the Ed Sullivan Theatre in downtown New York. It's that whole notion of the world is moving on and chugging along, and it is us that is still doing this lockdown thing. So that's the part where I feel that on one hand it's very frustrating to see other people moving ahead. On the other hand, it also gives me some beacon of hope that this can be done, i.e. normalcy. We just need to keep our heads together and make it work for the rest of us. I don't know. What do you think?
Yes, definitely, Ibrahim. I mean, I was viewing all those matches, and it appears like COVID never actually hit them. It's like the masks were off. It's near full capacity. In terms of social distancing, it's very minimal. I think we should share some sense of optimism of what it could be, because if you look at countries like Italy. At one point, I guess early on in the pandemic, especially in the earlier parts of 2020, they were one of the worst hit in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. and they get to bounce back, and countries like Spain as well, and you know, things are moving along. So I guess there is a light at the end of the tunnel. How do we get to the light, and when do we get to it is probably still fuzzy at the moment. But I think all we can do is keep on hoping, and I guess whatever that the government is currently doing, we just need to keep on monitoring, and you know, either suggesting better ways, or scrutinizing, or giving constructive criticisms, because at the end of the day, when the government wins, or rather when Malaysia wins, everyone wins. Ibrahim.
You know, I just want to focus back on how we started off the show. We were talking about how KJ was accusing the G7 countries of hoarding the vaccines. And the impact of when a country hoards their vaccines is this. You can have 50,000, 100,000 people congregating at the Ferenc Puskás Stadium, for instance, in Hungary, in Budapest. Imagine that, right? 50,000, 100,000 people all in one place. And you think about Italy, for instance, you know, the northern part of Italy, Turin, Juventus, you know, where they are. It's really, really bad. But because of the fact that they had access to vaccines, that would enable them to get on the path of the road to recovery better and faster. So I think for the week ahead, we want to end on this note. If we want to be structurally sound, come out better than before, I suggest we take a long and hard look into how we spend money into R&D, particularly in the pharmaceutical world, because we all know that the gestation period of a particular drug from discovery to manufacture to use at the market is actually quite long. In fact, one of the longest product cycles known to business. And I think when we have a long conversation about this, we also have to take a look into how the nation's policies are being managed. If it means pouring a lot of money into this sector, i.e. in pharmaceuticals, in improving healthcare, I think it must be done for our own survivability in the years to come, not just today or putting out the fires today. I don't know. That's just my thoughts, Hafiz.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And I guess on that note, actually, we have to end the show. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Week Ahead. I'm Hafiz Marzukhi.
And I'm Ibrahim Sani. That's all we have. We'll catch you next week.